You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
A massage chair might seem a bit extravagant, especially these days. 8 different settings, adjustable intensity, plus it's heated, and it just feels so good. Yes, a massage chair might seem a bit extravagant, but when it can come with a car, suddenly it seems quite practical. The all-new 2025 Volkswagen Tiguan, packed with premium features like available massaging front seats, it only feels extravagant.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Between two-factor authentication, strong passwords, and a VPN, you try to be in control of how your info is protected. But many other places also have it, and they might not be as careful. That's why LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast for 40% off. Terms apply.
Now, when we fought, you had that eye of the tiger and the edge.
I'm keeping him. Eat. Going home.
In 1982, while Iran starts to retake the offensive in the Iran-Iraq War and gets Khorramshahr back from Iraqi occupation, it would be a lie to say that every American TV set is glued to this operation and this war. There's very little, maybe a passing attention in the largest and most powerful country in the world, the United States. America's watching a different battle. One filled with layoffs, synthesizers, and Hollywood glow.
Phone home.
For the first time in my life, I'm afraid.
Nothing wrong with being afraid.
1982, the U.S. economy is actually in a painful recession. Unemployment is flirting with 10%. Inflation still lingers at this time. Interest rates are still too high for most comfort. President Ronald Reagan, who had defeated Carter on economic issues as well as other things, is in office. He's in his second year. He's selling his plan to cut taxes and slash regulation, Reaganomics, and now it's not looking so good. At the movies, audiences flock to Tootsie, Rocky III, and The Wrath of Khan. And on the airwaves, Prince's 1999, Steve Miller's Abracadabra, and MTV's Neon Blur shapes the culture of America. I remember the first moments of MTV. It was a pretty exciting thing. Arcade machines blinked on every corner. I remember that too. And so Iran-Iraq war that I'm describing here is something that's kind of in the background. There's talk about it. There's talk that American companies maybe are making money selling weapons and things like that. If you were a person that read Newsweek or Time or things like that, you might know a little more about it. But it also seems like it's a stalemate, and for a lot of people, they don't like either country. In Washington, Reagan's administration had watched with wary detachment. Officially, we were neutral. Behind the scenes, things were more complex. There's maybe a more support for Iraq. The State Department removes Iraq from the list of terrorism sponsors, which now can pave the way for sales of what's called dual-use goods. Could be helicopters, could be chemical equipment. Now, what's the problem here? All you need is to do a little tinkering, and you can turn some of those dual-use goods. You can mount missiles. Around the Arab world, most governments follow suit. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and smaller Gulf monarchies all fear Khomeini's revolution would leap borders into theirs. The same fear that Saddam had, one of the reasons he starts this war. Baathism is secular. It's brutal. But there's a lot of that going on in the third world. It's familiar. There's a lot of countries that aren't democracies, that aren't fair to their people, that the Soviet Union is communist, so we are kind of familiar with that. Iran was something new, a revolutionary regime that could perhaps skip borders, and everybody's concerned about that. They're not so worried about Baathism spreading around into their countries.
التسلسل التاريخي فلا تحسموا.
I don't like Saddam. Now, keep in mind, another motive that Saddam has in starting this war is he wants to be the leader of the pan-Arab movement, the pan-Arab nationalism movement, the leader of all, the one that people look at. If he beats the Shia regime, if he beats this revolutionary, this crazy Khomeini, everyone's going to look at him. He's got the best army. Everyone's going to look at him as the leader. And countries are maybe willing to tolerate that just now. Americans, when they're asked about it, if they know about this war, they sympathize more with Iraq than Iran. With Khorramshahr free, that's not enough for the Iranian regime. They've expelled the invader. The city of Avaz, Abadan are all liberated. Saddam's army, once competent, is really having a psychological and morale problem. They have this great equipment, but it doesn't help you if it's smoking in a desert. It doesn't help you if you can't hold a line because your lines are being infiltrated and you don't have enough people to stop the waves that they're bringing at you. Maybe Iran could say, that's it. Let's go to the ceasefire table. And what you're going to see now from 1982 forward is constant, either one country or the other, either pretending or really seeking international help with a ceasefire that will still be years away. We will not be satisfied till Saddam and the Ba'ath Party are overthrown, he declared in a televised sermon. Khomeini does. The road to Karbala is open, and beyond it, Jerusalem. Now, Iran wants a mission to punish. Iran had been invaded. Now, Iraq must be. Now, Iranian generals are divided about this. Some, including the new president, Ali Khamenei, urged caution. Others, especially the Revolutionary Guards, urged that Saddam had to go. This is a typical debate that many countries might have over regime change. Khomeini wants regime change. We could have a Shia uprising in Iraq, Khomeini says. Saddam's regime will collapse. Some of the generals think that's a step too far. July 1982, Iran launches Operation Ramadan, named after the Holy Moon. Fasting is supposed to bring spiritual clarity. Tens of thousands of IRGC troops and besieged volunteers cross the border north of Basra. They are now in Iraq, and they expect the Iraqi army to crumble in the same way Saddam expected them to crumble. And they got the same disappointed. It didn't. Iraq regroups. It digs in over Basra. It builds enormous defensive rings around Basra. Trenches, berms, barbed wire, minefields. They're not shocked anymore by the young that are being sent in. Now you've got this kind of World War I style slaughter, where from the trenches, thousands of Iranian boys and men are charging and dying under machine gun fire. When they try tanks, they're bogged down in marshes. Iraqi artillery are pounding Iranian staging areas without mercy before they can even get off the charges. Operation Ramadan fails, and Iran takes no ground. But they don't give up. They would try again, and again, and again. And between 1982 and 1984, Iran will launch 5 major offenses inside Iraq. Each time, Iraq lines were As a guards officer says, we cannot stop now. The blood of the martyrs must mean something. If you've committed to that kind of human wave attack, if you've committed to that absolute, we will reach Jerusalem, how can you give up now? The world is watching that kind of fanaticism, and they don't like it. And now Iran has become the attacker. So any empathy they might have had for Saddam Hussein having attacked them, maybe we'll work on a ceasefire or something, is rapidly ending. The U.S. provides satellite intelligence and dual-use equipment. So the U.S. will show, particularly in the defense of their own country, they'll show the Iraqis some things that they have with satellite photography, enabling them to aim their defense better, to put their resources where they can defend better. Something else happens. Soviets are watching this. Now, the Soviets, they had a relationship with Saddam Hussein. He could be a difficult client at times, but they had supplied him weapons. They didn't like the fact that he didn't tell them that he was invading Iran, and they held back shipments. Now that Iraq's being attacked, Saddam Hussein is calling Moscow, and they're receiving the message, and they're providing a resumption of tanks, equipment, weapons. Iraq has stopped Iran's advance in the period between 82 and 84, and they do it with Soviet help and growing aid from France, China, even a little from the U.S. It's not pretty, but they're keeping them out of their defensive lines, out of the major cities, out of the areas that matter. And Iraqi counterattacks are failing to gain any more initiative. In 84, a new front opens up.
The howl of another air raid siren brings Tehran to a virtual standstill. It means in just 4 minutes' time, an Iraqi missile will strike, wreaking more death and destruction in the War of the Cities,
which has been called the War of the Cities.
Many people have already fled the capital in fear. Others now lead new lives in underground shelters.
Saddam Hussein orders long-range artillery, Scud missile strikes on Iranian urban centers. He's just going to start bombing Iran's cities, bombing their people. Faz is hit, Desfoul is hit, even Tehran itself. He wants to break Iran's will.
Deep below city centre apartment blocks, families have formed subterranean ghettos for protection and company during the long hours of anxiety. There's no comfort or privacy and hardly any room for belongings. But some who've already lost homes, family and friends have precious little else in the world.
Iran decides to respond in kind. They have Chinese-supplied CSS-8 missiles. They target Baghdad, they target Kirkuk, they target Mosul. Sirens wail, basements become bomb shelters. In Tehran, school children are practicing missile drills like they were tornadoes. And there's 5 waves of the War of the City between 84 and 87. Each is deadlier than the last. Markets are hit, mosques are hit, hospitals. Civilians have no warning or no protection. And there's a massive psychological toll to this war. But it doesn't break anyone's will. In fact, this phase, the war in the cities, does what often happens in history when you bomb people. That when you bomb people, you don't get them to say, oh, I've got to overthrow my government. They usually say, I hate the people dropping the bomb. So that's kind of going back and forth. And as it is, Iraq unleashes a new weapon, one that it claimed it didn't have. And in Hajorman in the north, as Iran tries to open up a front and attack, Iraq uses a new weapon. It's really an old weapon, one that had been banned since the time of World War I in the West, mustard gas. It's sprayed from helicopters. It's launched from artillery shells. It's deployed in mines. It's deployed against Iranian frontline troops, Iranian guard units who had limited protection for it, and against Kurdish villages suspected of helping Iran. They've made these chemical agents in Samarra and Fallujah and factories using German and Dutch dual-use materials. Iran protests to the United Nations. They have pictures. They're showing the medical evidence. Burned lungs, blistered skin, mass graves. This is not a regular war weapon. These are against international law. And there's an irony, perhaps, to Iran going to to great countries that they hate and asking for international justice. But they do this during this war, and there isn't too much sympathy, particularly from the Security Council of the UN, which refuses to name Iraq as the aggressor. Too many countries had stakes in Baghdad's survival. They gassed us, and the world looked away, said an Iranian officer, recalling a 1985 battle in the marshes. We remembered who kept selling them those helicopters. Reagan and his administration are starting to tilt to Iraq even more and more publicly. Washington does not condemn the use of these chemical weapons, though intelligence agencies are aware. Satellite photos track suspected chemical attacks. Yet the State Department continues to label Iran the intransigent party.
Iran has suffered more than Iraq. About 150 Iraqi missiles have hit Iranian cities, nearly 3 times the number Iran has fired back. Sheltering from the missile blitz has become part of daily life in Tehran. The missiles being used by Iran and Iraq are Soviet-designed SS-1s called Scud by NATO. In its standard form, the missile has a range of some 300 kilometers and carries a high explosive warhead of 1,000 pounds. The standard Scud missile can easily hit Baghdad from Iranian soil, but Tehran is further from the common border, so Iraq has had to extend its missiles' range to 550 kilometers to hit the Iranian capital.
The War of the Cities could be said to be a stalemate because Iraq probably had more missiles, definitely had more missiles, was able to hit more targets, was able to instill fear all the way down to the lowest civilian in Iran, but the counter to that was increasing morale, making the case for martyrdom now that their own home cities were under attack anyway. Might as well join those troops, send your sons into the Basij. I mean, that's kind of the attitude that this brings. Another problem for Saddam is that he had just been gathering this reinvigoration of world opinion more to his side. Soviets, the French, the Americans, the Arab nations, particularly important. And then this War of the Cities attacking civilians is making things more difficult. They didn't cut him off, but it made things diplomatically difficult for him.
Coming up on it in 20 seconds. And it hits that little white spot at the bottom. The year 1986 will be upon us in just about 10 seconds from now. Once again, for the 14th consecutive year, let's wish you a Happy New Year!
The war had frozen across hundreds of miles, from the snow-capped Zagros to the muddy canals near Basra. Iran and Iraq are locked. They're using all the weapons that they have that the world is turning its head from, chemical gas and human waves. Villages are flattened, cities are emptied, victories have become abstract. Something else is going on. Saddam Hussein's economy is bleeding. He expected a quick victory here. It was supposed to be a knockout punch. He'd take Iran's oil, and he'd be the leader of Arab nationalism in the region. Instead, he's bleeding. His oil exports, the lifeblood of his state, are throttled. Syria, critically, an ally of Iran, blocks the Iraqi pipeline running through its territory. Estimates place Iraq's military spending at about $1 billion per month. $1 billion per month. It's importing $7.7 billion of arms in 1984 alone. Now, once Syria turns off that pipeline, Iraq loses about $5 billion per month in potential revenue for this. Debt surges. He's borrowing $60 billion from Gulf allies. There's civil strain. He has to introduce austerity and rationing and war mobilization. In order to do this, Saddam does something strange that nobody quite expected and must have produced a few chuckles. He starts celebrating his religion. He starts going to mosques. He starts praying, asking the nation to pray, starts appealing to religious leaders. Must have produced a few incredulous citizens in all of this. But he's trying to keep his country intact and also to look good for the rest of the world, and particularly those Arab nations who were religious governments. So in a stalemate here, with Iran having thrown off the yoke of the Iraqi attack on its own territory, even in this stalemate, you could argue, both are losing. Both countries are in terrible shape as a result of this war. But you could argue that Saddam in Iraq, having been the attacker, is losing a little bit more. And then in February of 1986, even the stalemate is broken. So we again, a lot of times you'll see references to World War I, like this kind of trench warfare to explain the Iran-Iraq war. But it's not exactly true, because there's major movements that you don't see on the Western Front in World War I. Iran launches Operation Dawn 8, and this isn't just like a desperate, uncoordinated, young, throwing the boys at the tanks type thing. It's a surgical strike from Iran's best military units. Although not everything is hunky-dory between religious leaders and military leaders, the government is happy to accept what help it can and what expertise it can. Amphibious guard units cross the Shat el-Arab under the cover of darkness, also artillery, and they land in 6 different points on the Al-Faw Peninsula. Iraqi commanders do not expect this. They assume no serious attack was possible there. It's marshy, it's exposed, it's hard to cross. They didn't anticipate an amphibious attack, even though Iranians had a little bit better navy than the one area that Iran was better than Iraq at was its navy. In 24 hours, the Iranians almost just walk through. They totally bypass the first lines of defenses. And Iraqi troops that are on the peninsula are mostly the poorly trained popular army, the conscripts. Some fight, many die, some flee, thousands are captured. And Iraq's key radar and air control site is overrun. This is the entire air command for the Persian Gulf region of Iraq. And it's the first time in the war that Iran now occupies a piece of Iraqi territory. Saddam's humiliated. He orders massive counterattacks, and this just increases the bloodshed because now Iranians are in position and none of them succeed. He has already purged many of his best generals, and likely after this operation, more were disappeared. He has relatives running parts of the military. Thought changes everything. And in a way, it's a perverse benefit to Saddam, although he probably didn't realize it at the time. The Arab Gulf monarchies are panicking now. If Iran holds this peninsula, they could also, where Al-Faw is, it's right next to Kuwait, Bahrain, even Saudi Arabia, and their oil terminals. Money, weapons, and political support are pouring into Saddam's hands. He barely has to ask. Reagan's White House is thinking about more overt naval involvement. It's not all with benefits to Iran. Certainly they're celebrating over the victory at Al-Faw, particularly how quickly it happened. 6 years of fighting a war with very little gain. Thousands of people dying over a mile, and then you take a peninsula in 24 hours. That's going to be good for morale. But at the same time, anytime you take something, you got to garrison it and you got to fight for it. And Iran's going to have to spend the rest of the war holding on to this.
My fellow Americans, I have spoken to you from this historic office on many occasions and about many things. The power of the presidency is often thought to reside within this Oval Office. Yet it doesn't rest here. It rests in you, the American people, and in your trust.
Simultaneously, there's a story that's going to rock America. A quieter war unfolded thousands of miles away. In Washington, D.C., inside the walls of the White House National Security Council, a scheme was taking shape. The NSC would smuggle weapons to Iran, yes, to Iran by way of Israel, through a chain of deniable actors in sealed crates. Iran was desperate for certain missiles, for certain parts, to keep its war operation going, because there had been an embargo since it had taken the hostages in 1979.
I felt it was improper to come to you with sketchy reports or possibly even erroneous statements, which would then have to be corrected, creating even more doubt and confusion. There's been enough of that.
And it's a very odd story. When this comes out, I think part of what even we know the Iran-Contra story, and where a lot of it settles is in the Contra part, because money from this operation is going to end up being used in Central America. It's a real scheme, and it's going to be centering around Reagan's involvement. But the real confusion is about the Iran part. Like, why is the Reagan administration spoken out against Iran so many times, supporting Iran? And it's one of these things that's such a crazy story.
A few months ago, I told the American people I did not trade arms for hostages. My heart and my best intentions still tell me that's true, but the facts and the evidence tell me it is not. As the Tower Board reported, what began as a strategic opening to Iran deteriorated in its implementation into trading arms for hostages.
Publicly, the United States supported Iraq. U.S. satellite imagery helped Saddam's forces target troop formations, particularly when it became more of defensive war for Iraq. And American ships were tilting the balance in any attacks that might happen. They're helping to escort oil tankers from the Arab nations. But behind the scenes, Reagan's administration approves the sales of hundreds of Tau missiles and spare parts for Hawk anti-aircraft system right into the hand of the Iranian government. Now, the reason for this is because American citizens, including a CIA employee, are being held hostage in Lebanon. The White House believes they can buy influence with Iran's more moderate elements. Men like Rafsanjani, who had the ear of Khomeini, the president. And because inside the Reagan White House, there was a belief that democracy could be built out of silence and secrecy.
I asked so many questions about the hostages' welfare that I didn't ask enough about the specifics of the total Iran plan. Let me say to the hostage families, we have not given up. We never will. And I promise you we'll use every legitimate means to free your loved ones from captivity.
It's going to help Iran in an operation called Karbala 6. And that's going to be a campaign aimed directly at Basra. We'll talk about that in a bit. There's some noticeable difference. Some commanders that see equipment they could never get their hands on, serial numbers marked in English letters. Like, we said nothing, one officer said. We were told not to ask. But in November 1986, the Lebanese magazine, Ashira, exposes that there's been a deal. The scandal detonates in Washington. By the way, it detonates in Tehran as well. This is going to lead to the imprisonment of the person who is believed to have leaked the story to the Lebanese newspaper, because he's so mad at the moderates, moderates for Iranian purposes. But in America, you arguably have something close, let's say if it continued in a different direction, to the impeachment of a president, a very popular president. Reagan has to appear on television insisting he did not trade for arms for hostages. And then days later, he has to admit that he did. There's congressional hearings. So you have to see Iran-Contra as something that's occurring in the context of the Iran-Iraq war, and most likely doesn't happen if there is no Iran-Iraq war, because Iran doesn't have the same need for these parts that have been embargoed. Saddam is furious about this. He sees it as a betrayal from the United States. It really shows you how the Iran-Iraq war is just this web of activities. It's not, we can say that the West supported Saddam more than Iran, and that's probably true. But here you have an example of where pretty significant shipments. That's the other thing. Reagan has some statements where he says just a few missiles or things like that. That was a pretty significant amount of missiles when you're trying to counter the onslaught of Iraq and starting to have some success and running out of equipment. So back in Iraq and Iran, you have the fact that Al-Faw had been seized. The War of the Cities is a stalemate and not good diplomatically. 16,000 people at least, possibly more, are going to die in that operation. Iraq keeps trying to do its own kind of al-Fawd and its own ground operations, and tries to break Iranian lines near Majnoon, Avaz, Dasful again. And these attacks, he's using Republican Guard units. They make limited gains at a very high cost, and no strategic cities are taken. And Iraq starts transitioning to just defensive tactics with their trench systems. As ground offensives slowed, both sides escalated attacks on oil shipping and infrastructure in the Persian Gulf, initiating what became known as the Tanker War. So within the Iraq War, we have the war on the cities, and we have the Tanker War. That's separated from the Iran-Iraq War when people are discussing it, because it's starting to involve other tactics in other cities that aren't in the ground war and other nations. In the case of the Tanker War, Iraq used aircraft to bomb Iranian oil terminals and shipping lanes, often with American intelligence support. Iran responds with Guard unit speedboat raids, mining operations, Silkworm missile launches, and they target tankers and they target U.S. escorts. The U.S. Navy now gets involved officially. So you're getting into 86, 87. Operation Earnest Will. American warships are escorting reflagged Kuwaiti tankers. When the Iranian mine layer, Iran Ajir, was captured in September, Navy SEALs find it. They had said they weren't laying mines in the Gulf. Navy SEALs capture it. It's a diplomatic disaster for Iran, and it gives the U.S. cover to get more involved. Operation Nimble Archer begins destroying Iranian oil platforms, and it culminates in Operation Praying Mantis in April 1988, and the U.S. Navy destroys significant portions of Iran's surface navy. So the Tanker War, which Saddam starts bringing in, or tries to finish bringing in other nations, doesn't end up going so well for Iran, and comes very close. You could argue that in the late 1980s, we are engaged in war with Iran, except that it's kept very low scale. And so in January 1987, the war returns to Basra. Iran, now having won Al-Fa, thinks that it can get more. It can go a straight line to Iraq's second largest city and probably win the war. What they engage in is not a border raid. They had done this before. It wasn't a diversionary assault. They had done this. They pretend to attack Basra and then attack something else. This is a full-scale attempt into Basra. And Iran throws everything that it has into Karbala. Now, what does this mean? Because haven't we been talking about a war in which Iran was already throwing everything it had? And this is true, but Iran's committing its most advanced formations, the regular army's best armored divisions, the elite strike forces, veteran commanders, anyone who fought at FA that had some success, sappers trained in night river crossings, artillery brigades pulled from quieter fronts, and even its limited air power, all of it is now going to be focused on this Karbala mission. The stakes are enormous for them. Now, what this means is Iran's giving up its strategic reserve. There is no more reserve. Everything's going to be committed for this attack. If this fails, there's nothing in the rear to rotate forward. Ammunition stocks are low, spare parts scarce, and yet Tehran gambles, because if Basra falls, Saddam's position would probably collapse. That's what they think. Victory here could win the war. The offensive begins with a night assault across the Salt River, part of the complex network of marshes and canals that surround the city of Basra. Sappers dismantle minefields under fire. Teenage volunteers carried explosives on their back. Human waves try to overwhelm the fixed positions. Some units advance under white flags painted with the word Karbala, invoking a Shia martyrdom figure. The goal is clear: collapse the eastern approach to Basra and force Iraq into capitulation. But Iraq wasn't going to do that. Saddam had transformed Basra into a fortress. He had repositioned his best units, laid down concentric trenches, flooded kill zones with chemical mines and artillery. The Iraqis used mustard gas liberally in this defense. French and Soviet weapons flowed in, and although Saddam raged against the Iran-Contra revelations, he still took the American satellite intelligence that flowed his way and knew, therefore, that an attack was coming. In fact, Iran attacks probably the worst point that they could. In a month, this great holy war offensive with everything Iran has that it can put on the ground had bogged down. Casualties were staggering, tens of thousands dead or wounded. Besieged units had charged into open fire once again. Entire battalions, some of Iran's best, had disappeared in the marshes. A quote from an Iranian commander was, "We reached the gates of Basra, but the gates were made of bones." Iran had taken the eastern outskirts of Basra's defenses, even parts of nearby cities, but could go no farther. And so again now, the war goes from a brief moment of Iranian superiority to stalemate. And Iraq, by 1987, having received help from the Soviets and the Arab nations, is no longer beleaguered. It has 5,500 tanks, 900 aircraft. That's far more than Iran has. They're receiving extensive Soviet and French support, training pilots, and getting better equipment in their air force, new jets. It is said that in the period after Al-Fa, Saddam Hussein started lowering political interference in military operations so that they could proceed. With the southern front locked in a stalemate, Iran shifts its attention to the north, exploiting its alliance with Kurdish Peshmerga guerrillas. Now, there's a mix of infiltration tactics, guerrilla operations in the mountains, controlled by Iran's Kurds, who aren't big fans of Saddam Hussein and he not of them. But Iran doesn't gain much, even with the help of Kurds. Iraq's retaliating with chemical weapons. And then the terrible attack on his own people, where he exercised collective blame. Thousands die in one of the deadliest chemical attacks of the century. Iran tries to point this out. They're flying journalists to the site, but nobody trusts Iran in 1987. They're just not going to get this. And so by the time you get to late 1987, Iraq now is bolstered. Volunteer numbers are down in Iran. I mean, Karbala really took everything out of them. And it decides it's time to win the war. It launches a series of combined armed offenses. And Iraq begins to recapture lost territory in the second battle of Al-Fa in April 1988. They now turn the tables and take Al-Fa in 48 hours. Iraq captures thousands of tanks and artillery pieces and vehicles from Iran. And it's paving its way for an entry into the country. Iraqi generals are telling Saddam now that they could strike deep, if not all the way to the capital, then far enough to force a surrender. And this is no longer propaganda. This is no longer telling the leader what he wants to hear. Iranian leadership sees this danger too. Their troops are stretched thin, and the population is tired after 8 years of war and sacrifice and seeing their sons come back. Now something interesting happens. Even as Saddam's regular forces push the front lines, another battle flares up behind them. In June 1988, a force emerges on the Iranian border. And it's the MEK, those groups that had supported the previous president, Ben Assadri, and had engaged in all that terrorism in 1982. They are now rebranded as the National Liberation Army of Iran, and their offensive is named the Operation of 40 Stars, or 40 Lights. MEK units, aided by Iraqi air power, struck Iranian city of Mehran, where Iran could not have anticipated there would be any ground forces, and pushed more than 20 kilometers, so let's say pushed 15 miles into Iranian territory. The MEK's goal here is that if Iran is going to be defeated, they want to create their own country. It succeeds briefly. MEK forces claim thousands of Iranian casualties, and for a few days, Iraqi state media hailed the incursion as a sign that the regime in Tehran could be overthrown. But it also galvanizes Iranian hardliners, who launch Operation Mersad just 2 weeks later. It crushes this little incursion within Iran. Nonetheless, Tehran is rattled. So what you have in July 1988 with world pressure, Iran, who had not wanted a ceasefire, even though one was offered early in the 1980s, reluctantly now agrees to a standing offer from the UN, Resolution 598, accepting a ceasefire and ending nearly 8 years of bloodshed. Many Iranians are shocked. Ayatollah Khomeini has to go on and say on TV that he's drinking poison, essentially. Drinking poison, because with the missile strikes on cities, chemical attacks, they can't answer, the military in tatters, the lack of new volunteers, there was no choice. And so the war ends, and the key thing to note is that it ends with no territorial change. There's Iran and there's Iraq, and the world is suspicious of both. In fact, now Iraq has transformed itself into a war machine, and Iran continues to be isolated and exhausted, and will harden the hardliners, so to speak. You can see that this Iran-Iraq war, sometimes forgotten about in history, it's a terrible and bloody war. I mean, the estimates vary. I think the number that many agree on is that 500,000 people died. Terrible war, both for Iran and Iraq. Iraq only has a population of 14 million. Iran about 40. And yet the casualties are almost even, so a little more Iran, but population-wise, it really hurts Iraq as well. This is going to lead to so much. Now, U.S. troops are committed to the Persian Gulf. I mean, they're already getting there because Carter had the Persian Gulf doctrine. You know, if you attack oil supplies, you attack the U.S. essentially. But now they're really there. This is going to be the beginning of the military operation, getting the years straight here. This gets wrapped up in 1988. It's going to be 2 years later that Saddam Hussein's going to utilize this army that he has, move into Kuwait. And that's going to start the first Gulf War, American troops in the Persian Gulf, American troops in the bases in Saudi Arabia, which will both lead to terrorist attacks against them there, and is also seen as one of the contributing factors to the growth of Al-Qaeda and the movement to push the Americans out of the Gulf. And so this Iran-Iraq war is not, is often forgotten about in history, but it actually leads to an awful lot. I mean, you start with the disruption of Jimmy Carter's hostage negotiation, at least promptly negotiating an end to the hostage crisis, perhaps before the election. I mean, that's some speculation, but it certainly doesn't help. Doesn't put Iran in a mood. He loses 1 month of critical time, critical negotiations. Then you get the near impeachment of a president in the Iran-Contra that just simply wouldn't have had a place without this war. You see the Gulf War, Americans sending troops to this region, and then the terrorist attacks of 9/11 and partially in retaliation to that. And you see that this war is essential. It's really the war that changed everything. I hope you enjoyed hearing a bit about this rather obscure war in the desert in the 1980s. Here's what I like about our sponsor, All the Hacks podcast, okay? You hear all these business podcasts, and they're all telling you to do things. Start a business, buy a home, write this up. All the Hacks is a podcast that acknowledges that things are pretty expensive right now. So All the Hacks focuses on tips and tactics to upgrade your life, your money, your travel, while spending less. It's about hacks. Money, what each generation gets right and wrong, with Ben Carlson. No relation. Some of us in Gen X or boomers can learn from millennials and Gen Z. It doesn't just go one way. I like his bonus episode about earning points on your mortgage, cards that have up to 4% bonus programs. All great. Search for All the Hacks on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Your wallet will thank you later.